All right, in this tutorial, we are going to talk about variables. We are going to talk about how to get input from a user, and we're going to talk about some operators, including a random number generator, joining text, and finding a specific letter in a string. To begin with variables, in Scratch, if you click on data, you'll see there's an option that says make variable. You can title this variable anything you want. A really common application of variables is scores, although of course there's tons of other stuff you can do with them. So I'm going to make a variable called score. I can set that variable to anything I want. So maybe the score starts at 0 and increases as certain events happen, or maybe the score starts at 10 and decreases as certain events happen until you die if your score reaches 0, or maybe that's lives. There's all sorts of variations you can do here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a game, and I'm going to set my score to 0. And then I'm going to create a forever statement, and I'm going to say if the space bar is pressed. If the space bar is pressed. Now what I can do is I can change. So this is going to like increment or decrease the score by a certain value. So right now I'm going to say change score by 1. And when I hit play, every time I hit the space bar, now notice this is reading very, very quickly. So if I hold the space bar down, my score is going to just skyrocket. I could, if I wanted to delay that, add a wait, and maybe say wait, I don't know, 0.5 seconds. And now when I hit play, notice the score resets to 0 because I have reset code resetting that variable. If that wasn't there, then the score would just pick up where it left off. Now when I hit the space bar, you can see it's going up by a single point each time I press it. That's a basic use of variables. Now sometimes, instead of you setting a variable and then changing it based on something that a user does, you may want the user to actually be able to populate that variable. So I'm going to create a second variable. I could use the same one, but I don't think it would make sense with this example. And I'm going to call it product. Now what's going to happen is I am going to go over to sensing, and I'm going to say ask a question. So let's get rid of all of this and that. And the very first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to ask the question, what is 2 times 3? Now what's going to happen is when I hit go, it's going to ask that question and it's going to wait on an answer. No other code in this specific function is going to be executed until I answer. Well, right now, let's just answer 5 incorrectly, and let's see what happens. Nothing, it seems like, has happened, but what has actually happened, there's this variable here that's always in Scratch, and it's called answer. And that variable now has the answer I gave stored inside of it. And I can prove this by adding in this say block and saying say answered. So let's try this again, and if I put 5 in, now the cat will suddenly say 5. That's that answer. If I want to have multiple answers in a game, then what I could do is I could take that answer and I could store it in my own variable. So I could say set product to answer. And now when I go and I type 5, the variable product, as you can see up here, has my answer stored inside of it. And this gives you a lot of powerful things you could do just based on getting that user input. It doesn't have to be numbers, it could be text as well. A couple of cool operators. We come over here, so you can probably figure out what plus, minus, multiplication, division do. Less than, greater than, equal to are all pretty straightforward. And checks to see if 2 things are true. So in an if block, instead of just saying if the space bar is pressed, I could say if the space bar is pressed and some other condition is true. Maybe and let's say we're touching the color brown, right? So now we're checking for 2 things. Or we'll evaluate if either of those conditions are true. A couple that are maybe less explanatory. First of all, mod. Mod is a pretty awesome tool. What it allows you to do is take 2 different numbers and it outputs the remainder. So 5 and 3. So if I want our Scratch to say the remainder of 5 and 3, all I have to do is have it say 5 mod 3, and that value will now be output. The modulus is going to be 2, because there's a remainder of 2. The last two features to look at are the generate or pick random number. And this does exactly what you would expect it to. At any time, this allows you to pick a random number. So you can see every time we execute, it's picking a different number randomly. This is incredibly valuable for games because in a gameplay, to make the experience most enjoyable, typically there's going to be some kind of random interaction, whether or not it's the way that the ball bounces off a wall or the trajectory that an enemy comes in at somebody. Games benefit a lot from having some element of randomness built into them. Lastly, there's some very cool string blocks that we're able to use. We can join things together. So I could join, and let's come back over here. We're going to ask a question, and then we could join that answer together. So let's say hello to someone's name. So now the game's going to ask you what your name is. You type your name in, and now it's going to join the text hello with your name and say, hello, Ryan. You can also find the specific letter of a string, and this becomes really valuable when you're trying to understand things about what a string means. So we could say what's the length of the word world, or we could say what is the blank letter. This gets really cool because you can set up loops and you can say loop for the length of a word, each letter of that word. And so we'll actually use this in the challenge coming up here in just a minute. Thanks a lot.